Let's go to the West Her Hotline. First and foremost, we're starting with Ryan Tracy. Ryan is the host of the Locked On Chiefs podcast, amongst other things. Ryan, first and foremost, thanks for making time, man. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. So obviously, quite a season, quite an end of the season. I'm sure quite an off season. At least, I was thinking about this, Ryan. At least the Chiefs figured out how to get how to win a Super Bowl right before the world apparently wants to end. That's a great way. If all things go down the drain, at least you're going to end things with a Super Bowl victory. That must be nice. I wouldn't know. I just wouldn't know.
There's always hope, though, right?
Yeah.
You could know in the future. Hopefully there's not another pandemic, so this situation doesn't happen again. But, in Kansas City, the view is the opposite. Could they have made anything harder for a team to go back-to-back? That's the thinking, Chris.
Yeah, fair enough. And Chris Jones this week making some headlines, looking like he isn't going to play football without a new contract. First and foremost, let's start there with Jones. How important is Jones to the interior part, the run defense of that defense? And maybe more importantly, do the Chiefs have enough flexibility to lock him up to the number he wants, considering Patrick Mahomes is going to make $1 billion?
Yeah, that number is going to be pretty incredible when it happens. Let's start with the first part. That is really the question mark about balancing what you think you're going to have to spend on the best quarterback in the league versus preempting that with a contract for a defensive tackle. That is a little bit of a misnomer in how the team wants to go about it. And it's a tough evaluation. Clearly right now, after the comments last night, I think that really illustrates just how far apart the two parties are in their valuation of what Chris Jones is worth going forward. Chris has made it known and his people that he wants to be paid on the likes of Aaron Donald, and I don't think the Chiefs believe that that's his true value on the field. Now, it's interesting that you brought up the run game because Chris Jones is an excellent pass rusher. Mm-hmm. Strong, quick, can shoot gaps, can bull rush. He is well-rounded in the pass game. It's the run game that leaves him a little bit wanting. There are reasons that they've had to stock up on run-stopping defensive tackles to play behind him because that's not his forte. He's solid, certainly can't take anything away from him, but he's not an immovable object or somebody that they have to game plan against in the run game. So I think that's part of it. If he were a fully well-rounded player, I think his valuation would be higher both from the Chiefs themselves and around the league. But they have a couple of backup players that can do that. Without him, however, though, the pass rush from the interior suffers greatly. The other two prime players that have some experience are Derek Nottie and Mike Pennell, primarily those backup run-stuffing types. And they made an investment in Colin Saunders, but I don't think that he's there ready to take over the primary pass rush, three-tech type role. So that would leave them a little bit wanting if this doesn't happen. But I don't think it's going to come down to that. I think we will see Chris in a uniform for the Chiefs this year.
It's interesting. I mean, he's certainly one of the more dynamic interior defensive line in football. So let's just go on a limb and say, Ryan, that he's not going to play this year, which means that Kansas City is going to be in a tough spot. And if Kansas City is unwilling to meet the demands of whether it's a yearly or guaranteed money standpoint, then I guess the option becomes you trade him. And if that's the case, then, how do you fill that hole? You kind of mentioned some of the guys currently on the roster, but, at this point with so much uncertainty around the league, this doesn't appear to be great timing for a holdout situation, nor does it appear to be great timing for the Chiefs, who are, as you mentioned, looking to try to, go back to back in Super Bowls. And I think this is the important part of all this, Ryan, is we're still talking about a team that is utilizing and benefiting from paying their quarterback on a rookie salary. We know that is basically the NFL's version of a cheat code, which is, stacking your roster around a quarterback who's being paid very little while you can maximize sort of that time frame of when he's getting paid very little. So, how do you strike a balance between understanding that we want Chris Jones, we want him at our number, but if we're unwilling to move off that number so that we can maintain that flexibility to sign Mahomes to whatever number he's going to be, well, then the option is to trade him. And is that really something that the Chiefs want to explore, considering that would leave a pretty significant hole in the middle of their defense?
I don't think it has been up until this point. The Chiefs have been very vocal about wanting Chris back, period, carte blanche. It's been about arriving at the number. Since they haven't been able to do that, this comment, I'm not sure that a social media response really warrants feeling that that's what he and his representatives are actually going to choose to do and not show up for the tag. But if it were the case, it does change the equation for me, and I would think so for the team as well. And I talked about seeking a possible trade last week, only because this was the fear that you reach a point where you don't feel you can get a long-term deal done with Chris Jones. At that point, you can't really go much farther without hurting your overall value and your team valuation. And it's a similar situation in New York with Jamal Adams, who actually said that Kansas City is one of the destinations he would consider. I don't know that he has any actual say in it, but both franchises have reached a point now where they have a star player who they may not even see an end road to actually achieving a contract extension for the long term. And it may be best to cut bait and try to do a player swap that gives everybody a fresh start and a new regime to deal with, and maybe they can both benefit in the end.
Ryan Tracy here of Locked On Chiefs on the Wester Hotline. Let's talk about the draft, Ryan. The Clyde Edwards-Helaire pick, that really excited me for a lot of reasons, but I think really it's the fit that you have in Andy Reid's offense. Tell us a little bit about what you believe the plans are for Edwards-Helaire, and talk a little bit about what kind of dynamic bringing a legitimate pass catching and just kind of overall back to this offense might mean to their. Could they be better as an offense next year?
That's the scary part for the rest of this league, is I think they actually can be. Not only because of the running back, because Mahomes still has room to improve as well. And he will be the first one to tell you that, which is a scary prospect for the rest of the league in general. But Clyde Edwards-Helaire, you nailed it. He is the perfect fit for Andy Reid's system because of well-roundedness. He actually blocks pretty well in the pass game when he is asked to stay in. I like the way he runs between the tackles. That's a sneaky aspect of his game that you don't hear a lot about. But for a smaller guy, he generates some power inside. And the Chiefs have not been great in short yardage lately, so a little bit of extra power from the running back may actually be a help. But that passing game is the bread and butter. And Damian Williams is no slouch in the passing game. It's the way that they go about it. Damian's better hitting on the outside. Damian's better with the screens, in my opinion, than he is on the inside, trying to run those little drags or anything where he filters through the line and tries to make himself available. That's the big difference for me. I don't see it as Clyde Edwards-Helaire comes in and starts immediately. I think that the Chiefs are concerned about attrition. They went through a lot of backs last season in getting to that Super Bowl. And so I don't anticipate, unless something really comes along that says we don't need Damian, I think he will be there, and they will split time, at least for the first half of this particular season, depending on however long that is. And then I think you'll see Clyde Edwards-Helaire start to gain some ground in terms of touches. But it's Clyde Edwards-Helaire, what he does on arrow routes, on crossing routes, in between the hashes, which is, I think, a new focus for where this offense has to go, given that coverage is going to play back. They're going to guard deep. So it's Travis Kelce and McCole Hardman, and now Clyde Edwards-Helaire that can play between the hashes and really make up some of those ground the defense are going to give them.
Ryan, this is an easy question, at least when I'm asking it, but it might not be an easy answer for you to come up with. Sammy Watkins. That's kind of the question, but what is going on? Because he is one of the highest paid players at his position, at least in terms of a per year basis. He does take a little bit of a haircut to return this year. How do you find, I would tell you, I'd find a more consistent role for Sammy Watkins in that offense, considering the amount of money he's making? And does his price tag actually even matter as much as maybe it does on the outside looking in?
I like the way you phrase that. Sammy Watkins question mark. That is really the definition of it. Finding a role is definitely something that they want to do more. He had a better season in terms of nagging injuries and maintaining his explosiveness, but he did have some down games. He missed a couple. He missed a little bit of time where he wasn't really gaining the separation that you like to see, but he came back strong in the playoffs. We all saw what he did to Richard Sherman in the Super Bowl. Those are significant steps that you would not have thought in years past that Sammy Watkins would be available for 19 games into the season. So I do see some progression there. And I think for the Chiefs in general, I think that game in particular showed the league that you cannot just double Tyreek Hill on the other side. You have to pay attention to Sammy because he is capable of beating people one-on-one. I think that draws the coverage back to more of an even pace. And I really do feel, even though the salary is high, that the team is looking at this as a way to achieve more balance, and trying to just spread the ball out is a great concept, but they want to distribute specifically to target areas outside the numbers with Sammy and let Tyreek do some of the deeper crosses and some of the things that he does that are so special for his physical ability, and let Sammy continue to grow in this role of being the body guy that can be physical with a top corner, a physical corner, and take on some of those matchups that they're thinking they're going to see.
Are you at all surprised, and maybe this isn't a good way to phrase it, but are you at all surprised about, Tyrann Mathieu's sort of ascension? And I mean, it's not to say that in Houston or previously before that he wasn't a really solid top end talent in this league. But the thing that interests me about Mathieu is the story of him coming out of college, all of the drama, all of the red flags of him coming out of college. And I don't really know if I can remember a better example of a guy turning things around so dramatically, and going through not only all the off the field stuff, but then all the on the field injuries and issues that he had to deal with early in his career to become one of, if not one of the best safeties in football. I think it's a tremendous story, but I don't think one that anybody could have really predicted.
Maybe not. I mean, there were a few that were in his corner from the beginning. I, too, had a lot of concerns about him coming out of college. I had dropped him down my board specifically because of what I still saw as maturity issues. And I think that continued after he was drafted. I think you saw some of that. The injuries, I feel, play into the maturity issue. We even saw his draft prep didn't go very well. He didn't train to get up to Michigan like he said he was going to. He didn't get some of those things done. And I think that continued after he was a professional, and not maintaining his body, not developing his body to withstand the rigors of the NFL season. I think that caught up with him early in his career, but I think you saw that start to mature. And I think you saw when he got to Houston, the ability to not only be a natural playmaker, but be somebody who can be there consistently and be relied upon. And I think that really fed into what the Chiefs coveted in taking a guy who had persevered through all that struggle, gotten to the point where he's still productive, he's still instinctual, he's still making plays. And I think they went to him, and they certainly, in looking at this in hindsight, had a specific role in mind for him to become a leader, to be a guy that they can put up in front of a defensive meeting room and rally everybody behind. That's certainly what he's become. And I think that was partially the investment the Chiefs were willing to make in him emotionally that helped him take yet another step in maturation and get to the guy that we saw on the field last year.
I think, too, I look at this team, and the defense really is a super interesting story, because when you look a couple years ago, and this was Andy Reid's downfall. This was the reason that, quote unquote, they were unable to get over the hump. What changed? I mean, was it a schematic change? Was it really just they drafted well, and they added guys like Mathieu and the emergence of Chris Jones? Like, of course, those are obvious things, but how much does the scheme matter in the ascension of this defense becoming a Super Bowl caliber unit?
I think the scheme is probably the thing that gets the least attention. That is probably the biggest factor in what happened. The team had some talent before. Clearly, they drafted well the last couple of years in terms of fit for the Spagnuolo system, but they had some talent before. It just wasn't being used to its utmost. The previous defensive coordinator was very rigid in his scheme, tried to make players fit into his role rather than adapting, and I think that's the thing at the core of what Steve Spagnuolo has done throughout his coaching career, but specifically the last 14 months in Kansas City, is he has adapted. He has experimented. He has tried to find the strengths in his players and use that to his advantage rather than trying to play a scheme and make everyone adapt to it. I think that deserves a lot of credit. He also has a really good staff that he's put together, with Daly from previously with the Patriots to Matt House, who has been a head coach at the college level. A lot of talent in the coaching ranks on the defensive side. And I think that's really got to play a key role, too. It is still very much a defense they are teaching. but they're starting to move past that. They've spoken this offseason about not having to go through the fundamentals as much, being able to let players be more intellectuals, realize what they see, act upon it. And I feel the evolution of this defense, much like we've seen in the past with Steve Spagnuolo, is going to be year 2, year 3 when it peaks. And we'll see if they can sustain after that.
We've got the host of Locked On Chiefs here, Ryan Tracy, on the Western Hotline. Ryan, before I let you go, there's a couple things I want to hit on. And I want to start with the actual matchup between the Bills on Thursday night and the Chiefs. It's kind of one that, you know, I think a lot of Bills fans saw the schedule come out, saw primetime, and circled it. Like, this is a measuring stick type game, right? Talk a little bit about what you believe that matchup. Now, again, this is assuming that this game happens and there is no, cancellations, postponements, or any movement that actually happens in the game schedule this year. But talk a little bit about that matchup and maybe what you like and don't like, or maybe see, this Bills defense is expected to, in my opinion, take a step forward this year. I think they've got more consistency on the edge with Mario Addison and a couple more pieces along the defensive line. You've got Tremaine Edmonds going into year 3, which I think is going to be a big year for him. So if the Bills defense gets slightly better this year, what are you looking forward to in that matchup between a high-calibered offense against one of the league's best and most consistent defenses?
Well, certainly you hit on a guy coming out of college a couple of years ago in Edmonds that I really liked. And I think that will become something, especially if we see the evolution of what the game plan will be. I'm not sure just how far the Bills staff wants to change what they do well. There's a certain point where I think schematically you don't want to step outside of your box too much. But then again, the speed of Hardman and Hill and even Watkins is going to be difficult to deal with. So I could see some deeper coverages coming. So again, feeds into what we talked about with Clyde Edwards-Helaire. Could we see a matchup of Edmonds and CEH or Edmonds and Williams? I think Travis Kelce is going to be a big factor. I think they've shown over the last couple of seasons that throwing a big defensive back, a safety type at him doesn't work. Throwing a speedy but smaller defensive back in a corner type, a nickel at him, doesn't work. I don't think that there's an answer. I'd be very interested to see how they choose to play both Travis Kelce and the running backs in that particular game, because I think the Chiefs are very cognizant of where they've been weak in the past, and they are making a lot of specific targeted looks at trying to change some of those things up. The thing that I'm most concerned about is the team playing on Thursday, but
right. No, that to me could also be a very big factor on what both teams on short rest. In a short rest situation, who gets the upper hand? Is it an offense or is it a defense? And I guess I don't really know the answer to that, but I think that's something to think about as that matchup approaches. But Ryan, thanks so much, man. Thanks for making time for us here at WGR. We do really appreciate it. Let's do it again as the season approaches, and obviously that matchup on deck. We'll definitely be talking again in the future, man. Thanks so much.